1952. A walk-up studio on Fulton Street, Brooklyn. For nearly a decade, a Soviet intelligence colonel running the KGB's most significant illegal residency in North America rented that studio, told his neighbors he was a photographer, and collected $5 per session for portrait work. His name, as far as anyone in the building knew, was Emil Goldfuss. He was quiet. He paid on time. He smelled faintly of turpentine and developer fluid, which made sense because he painted as well as photographed. His neighbors found him pleasant in the way that people find unremarkable things pleasant, without thinking about it at all. He had arrived, it seemed, from nowhere in particular, which was, in a precise sense, exactly true. His real name was William Genrikhovich Fischer. He had been born in Newcastle, England, to Russian immigrant parents, raised in the Soviet Union, and trained by Soviet intelligence over decades of quiet, careful work. In 1948, he entered the United States on forged documents identifying him as Andrew Coyotes, a Lithuanian-American man who had died. He used that name long enough to obtain another. The name Emil Goldfuss belonged to a child who had died in infancy in New York City in 1903. Fischer found the birth record. He became the child. He rented the studio. He began his work. That work was the coordination of a Soviet intelligence network operating across North American soil during the opening years of the Cold War. Fischer, operating under the KGB, designation of officer commanding an illegal residency, communicated with Moscow Center using shortwave radio equipment assembled in the studio. He also used hollow coins, nickels and quarters with cavities machined to conceal microfilm. The tradecraft was elegant and patient. For years it held. Then a coin slipped. In 1953, one of the hollow nickels passed out of the network by accident. A newsboy in Brooklyn received it as change. The coin felt wrong in his hand, too light, the way something feels when it has been emptied of what it should contain. He pried it open. Inside was a piece of microfilm printed with a grid of numbers. He brought it to the police. The FBI received it shortly after. Analysts confirmed the numbers were an encrypted Soviet communication. They had the coin. They did not yet have the man. For 4 more years, Fischer went on painting. He went on taking portraits for $5 a session. The coin sat in evidence while the network continued operating beneath it. What broke the operation was not the coin, and not the radio, and not any failure of Fischer's own making. It was a man named Reino Heihanen. Heihanen was a Finnish-born KGB officer who had been inserted into the United States in 1952 as Fischer's assistant. He drank. He was erratic. He was, by multiple accounts, frightened of his own handler. In the spring of 1957, Heihanen was recalled to Moscow, a recall that, in the KGB, carried implications he understood clearly. He did not board the flight home. Instead, he walked into the American embassy in Paris and asked to speak with the CIA. He told them about Fischer. He told them where Fischer lived. FBI agents arrested Fischer on the 21st of June, 1957, at the Hotel Latham on East 28th Street in Manhattan. He had been staying there under the name Martin Collins, another identity, another dead man's paperwork. When they took him, they also searched the Fulton Street studio. What they found there was methodically ordinary: painting supplies, negatives, radio components, a cipher pad, a block of wood that could be hollowed. The portraits were still on the walls. Some of his canvases were still wet. Fischer gave the arresting agents a name. Not his real name. He told them his name was Rudolf Abel. It was the name of a deceased KGB colleague, a small courtesy, some analysts later suggested, a signal sent to Moscow that the officer in custody was a professional who intended to say nothing of value. He said almost nothing of value. His trial, which concluded in October of 1957, produced a conviction on 3 counts under the Espionage Act and a sentence of 30 years. He was the most senior Soviet intelligence officer ever captured and tried on American soil to that point. He maintained, throughout, the bearing of a man attending someone else's proceedings. The investigation had reached its limit. Hayanen's defection had given the FBI a person, an address, and a cover name. It had given them very little else. The identities Fisher had used before Goldfuss remained unclear for years. The full scope of what he had transmitted remained classified. The cipher pad recovered from the studio was analyzed extensively. What it unlocked or failed to unlock was not made public. The studio itself was relet. The portraits, presumably, were disposed of. The hollow coin remained in evidence storage, a physical fact without a complete explanation attached to it. On the 10th of February, 1962, Fisher was driven to the Glienicke Bridge, the span connecting West Berlin to Potsdam. On the other side, Francis Gary Powers, the U-2 pilot shot down over the Soviet Union in 1960, was waiting. They crossed in opposite directions. Simultaneously, at Checkpoint Charlie, an American student named Frederick Pryor was released. It was the first exchange of its kind in the Cold War. Fisher returned to Moscow, resumed his work for Soviet intelligence in an advisory capacity, and died there in 1971. What his neighbors on Fulton Street remembered, in the few interviews that surfaced afterward, was that he had been a capable photographer. Careful with light. Good at putting people at ease in front of the camera. Patient in the way that a person is patient when waiting is simply part of the work. The portraits he took during those years have never been fully catalogued. Somewhere there are people who sat for him, paid their $5, and never knew who held the camera. What did he see, looking back at them through the lens?